Well, as usual on a Thursday, we take a look at the top news stories coming out of the United States. And joining us today is Amanda Makki, Republican strategist, lawyer, and a friend of the program. Amanda, great to have you with us. Let's start with what is unfortunately a tragic story, Wednesday's deadly shooting at a church-run school in Minneapolis. The FBI director, Kash Patel, is calling this an anti-Catholic hate crime. I mean, is this the top news story in the United States on all the channels today?
Absolutely, it is. It's a big tragedy. Obviously, we mourn for two young children starting school, parents sitting in a Catholic church being gunned down. I mean, really sprayed down by this deranged person who basically left this manifesto that was very, I read the full manifesto, all 4 pages, that was so selfish, so narcissistic, saying that, I want to leave this world and this is such a bad place. Why did he have to take the lives of 2 innocent children? And I think what's scary about this is that as someone who is, I have a conceal and carry permit, I do own a gun, sometimes I have these conversations, especially amongst females, that say, I'm scared when I drop my children off at school. I worry that someone, just like what happened yesterday, just like what happened in Parkland, and you name it, every few months, this is unfortunately happening in the United States. I'm scared to leave my kids at school. So what is the answer? Some people may say, well, I'll pull my kids out of school and homeschool, but the reality is that's not available to everyone. So what is it that we need to do as a nation? Our lawmakers, what needs to happen to stop these tragedies from happening? We're never going to stop it, but what can we do to make it happen less?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's been all too many of these sorts of tragedies in the United States. There seem to be regular shootings that take the world by surprise, that shock the world and America, obviously. Has this triggered the usual sorts of debate that we tend to get in these situations about tightening up of gun ownership laws, perhaps reducing the number of guns in circulation? What's being talked about?
This one's a little different. This one's all been about transgenders. So they've been obviously noted that the individual who is deceased, the gunman, was going by the name Robin, but was born Robert, had recently undergone a transition and had transitioned, I guess, not clear on that. But, a lot of this topic has now shifted to the trans. And so, a lot of people on the right are saying, this is mental health. Clearly someone who they've kind of drawn it out from someone who has to transition from being a man to a woman, and the mental health issues that ensues, if they are transitioning, why aren't they getting the mental health that they need? So it's a topic that's always discussed when we discuss, these tragedies that happen. Mental health is always the biggest part of it, because who in their right mind would do this? No one. As a gun owner, never would that happen. The people that I know, that would never happen. So it is clearly someone who's deranged. But what's interesting is that he legally, lawfully obtained those guns. There wasn't like a straw man, someone in the middleman, anything like that, as best as we can tell right now, without further investigation. So they're looking at the mental health. But what's really coming out, if you saw Nancy Pelosi yesterday saying, we protect the trans community, we love the trans community, and others talking about trans rights, even the mayor of Minneapolis himself saying, we protect our trans community. So it was an interesting shift, because typically you don't see or hear that. But I have seen on social media where people have gone back to the most recent shootings, let's say over the last 4 years, and said every single one of these people had some kind of trans ideation, and really putting the onus on the mental health that the people who are transitioning may not be getting. And that becomes part of a much larger debate as to why young children are able to transition from becoming a male to female or vice versa, and maybe not getting the mental health that they need.
Okay, and I just want to pick up on one thing you've mentioned, because you've said it more than once, that you are yourself a gun owner. I mean, do you feel like having a gun, and if more people had guns, that in fact there would be more security on the streets of the United States? Is that where you come from?
Well, here's the reality is that in Washington, D.C., they make it all but impossible for someone like me to own a gun. Now, if I was in law enforcement or previous law enforcement, they do make it a little bit easier. However, for someone like myself, and if I'm living by myself in a city that is ridden with crime like Washington, D.C. or Chicago, or you name the city, I cannot own a gun. In Florida, I can. I take a class, I get properly trained, and I can own a gun. But in D.C., I can't, yet the criminals can. And so this, sparks a larger debate on why law-abiding individuals can't own a gun to protect themselves, their families, their loved ones. If I walk into a Walmart and there's an active shooter, I can't protect myself if I'm in Washington, D.C. I can if I'm in Florida and states that protect those individuals who want to own guns.
Okay, well, you've brought us onto our next topic inadvertently, because I wanted to ask you a bit more about the situation in Washington, because that's been very much in the headlines, with President Trump declaring a crime emergency there at the US Capitol. I mean, just how bad is the situation, and what sort of crime are we talking about there?
So as a native Washingtonian, I can kind of run you through the eras of crime in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. has been known for crime. We had a mayor, Marion Barry, in the late 80s, and he actually was engaged in hiring prostitutes, and he did crack himself, and they actually set up a sting and busted him in a hotel in Washington, D.C. in 1989. Or it might have been 1990. So this is a city that has been plagued with crime and drugs. What is interesting is that it has been drug-ridden and crime-ridden for so long, but it has gotten by far exponentially worse since COVID. Why is that? Because the city of DC shut down. Until President Trump took office, government employees didn't even have to go back to work. So imagine from 2020 to 2025, the city basically had no one going to work. The requirement for under White House personnel rules was you had to show up twice every pay period. So the city was basically deserted, businesses deserted. So you had crime sprees going on. Carjackings were up over 500% in Washington, D.C. Robberies, major crimes happening in areas that you wouldn't imagine this would happen. I'm sure you heard 2 months ago, a summer intern working on Capitol Hill, wasn't even 20 years old. He was murdered. In a very safe, what is considered a safe part of Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., where the homes are well north of $1 million US. And so what President Trump is now doing is he's cracking down on the crime that's happening there, and the results are in. Today, Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C., posted the crime statistics. Overall, violent crime is down 48% from this time period, so from August 7th to the 24th of August, 2024, to the current exact same days in 2025. That's how much the violence has gone down in that same time period. So you are seeing instant results. No one can dispute it. And President Trump is saying, we're going to make Washington, D.C. safe for people again. And he already has. The proof is there. The stats don't lie. And what he wants to do, obviously, which may be where we segue into, is he wants to look at other cities in America that deserve the same thing that Washington, D.C. does, like Baltimore, which is just 40 minutes from Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Amanda, which other cities might President Trump have his eye on? If it's worked in D.C., he's obviously going to try to apply the same formula elsewhere. I mean, one of the cities I heard about was New York. Is that a possibility?
So I've heard more often than New York, I've heard Chicago. Now that may be because he's gone after the mayor of Chicago as well as the governor of Illinois. So I think Chicago may be next. Philadelphia, I've heard, and Baltimore. I think Baltimore because of its close proximity to Washington, D.C. As I said, just about 40 minutes away. One of the most crime-ridden cities in America. And the problem here really lies with Washington, D.C. as a territory that the executive branch does have more control over than obviously autonomous cities like Chicago and New York City, or you name the city. So Washington, D.C. is in a category of its own as far as legal challenges that could ensue. But when you see the interviews that are happening in the streets, reporters talking to women, men, people from all walks of life, older, younger, they all want to see their cities come back to being safe again. They don't feel safe. And one thing I always like to tell people, and someone else said this, I heard on a network, was that your feelings don't care about facts. And so if someone says, but look at the facts in Chicago, the facts show we've had less murders or less, it doesn't matter. If people don't feel safe, they don't care what your facts are. They care about their feelings. And their feelings right now are Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C. These are unsafe cities. They feel unsafe. They want protection. They want the president to come in and clean up these cities. And that's exactly what he's doing. And this is not a bipartisan issue. This is Republicans and Democrats and independents, and whoever you are, you want to feel safe. You want your family to feel safe. Yeah,
absolutely. I just want to move on to our next topic, which is a bit of a diplomatic spat between Washington and Copenhagen. We've had the US Chargé d'Affaires summoned by the Danish authorities. This relates to Greenland. Just tell us a bit more what this is all about.
Well, Vice President J.D. Vance visited Greenland with his wife back in March. And the president spoke at the State of the Union, as he did after, in a social media post, saying, we're not trying to take Greenland away from them. What we're trying to do is make sure that they are being best served. Is the Kingdom of Denmark serving them the best way that they can, or is another country better equipped to take care of this country? And of course, President Trump has made no bones about it. Greenland is important strategically, not just for the United States, but for the global stage, whether it's the threat of Russia or China. The strategic location of Greenland makes it very important on the world stage. So I think he's been very forthcoming about what he wants, but also realizing and recognizing that the people of Greenland will ultimately make that decision. But I think President Trump, being the negotiator that he is, he believes that if you offer them a better offer than what they're getting, maybe they will come. And so I think we will wait to see what happens. Obviously, Denmark is very unhappy about this, and is kind of calling this out and saying, we need to convene because they shouldn't be doing this. But really, it's the people of Greenland that get to make that decision.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk through all of those developments there in the past week in the United States. Amanda Makki, Republican strategist, lawyer, and friend of this channel. Thank you very much indeed for your time.